A new version of full self-driving has arrived, and for the first time in quite a while, we have some actual release notes about changes, which is super nice to see. My favorite, besides end-to-end on highway, being the addition of updated driver profiles. So now we have Chill, which drives in slower lanes with minimal lane changes, Standard, which drives at normal speed and adjusts with traffic, and a brand new one called Hurry that replaced the old Assertive mode that drives faster with more frequent lane changes. Something that wasn't in the release notes that I noticed instantly was that the visualizations that display other vehicles seem dramatically smoother than ever before. I, like many others, assumed this was probably accomplished by using more resources and processing power, but Ashok, the head honcho of the Autopilot team, said it was achieved by fixing a 4-year-old bug in the renderer, which makes me think that this improvement will likely come to more than just hardware for vehicles. This ended up being a much larger update than I expected, and I can't wait to show you my first drive and initial impressions with it after I tell you about this video's sponsor. Private Internet Access is an open source VPN that lets you spoof your geolocation through 91 different countries and also all 50 individual US states, which not only helps protect you against the prying eyes of data collectors, but can also unlock geo-restricted content on all major streaming services and get you a better deal on things like flights and games. They have strict no-logging data policies, which have not only been proven true by independent security audits, but have also been proven again and again in court when government demands them to provide users data and they simply can't because there's no data to give. By using my special link in the description, you can get 83% off and 4 months free, which comes out to about $2 a month. A single membership also covers an unlimited amount of devices and an unlimited amount of simultaneous connections, making it easy to share with every member of your household and protect all the devices. They have support staff available 24/7, and with a 30-day money-back guarantee, there's really no reason not to try it, and it's genuinely a product I use all the time and highly recommend. A big thanks to PIA for being a long-term sponsor of this channel. Alright, first drive with full self-driving 12.5.6. I should point out that this is a hardware 4 vehicle and I'm using the new Hurry mode. You can see I started this drive in the car wash parking lot and it has to get through this gate to leave, and it seems very confident about approaching and then driving through this gate, which actually was pretty surprising. I have tried that on older versions and it seemed to slow down for the gate a lot more until it was fully opened and then kind of creeped through, but that time it just went through no problem. Another change I noticed in this area is right up here. There's a stop line by this stop sign on the ground that makes no sense. It's way too far back, and for the first time, full self-driving actually ignores the stop line and it stops where it can see traffic approaching from the left. This is a massive improvement, especially in that particular area. Unfortunately, it's not very consistent though, because it was stopping at the stop lines for the rest of this drive, but it does seem to stop a little bit more forward in general. Pretty awkward situation up here where this truck finds itself in the wrong lane and is trying to move over, but full self-driving doesn't actually brake for it and kind of just moves over into this left-hand lane. What you can't see was there was actually a van approaching very quickly behind us, which is why I think it may not have slammed on the brakes, but honestly I'm not 100% sure about that one, but a pretty odd maneuver. It is now forced to do a U-turn to get us heading back in the right direction, and it doesn't pull far enough into this intersection. It would have a much easier time if it pulled just a little bit more forward, but you can see it cuts it really tight where it has to deal with this curb here. It does complete the entire thing all on its own, albeit a little bit slow and awkward. Now, I've mentioned before that I don't think the driver profiles that we talked about work anywhere but the highway, and I still think that's the case, but I did have a situation that made me think twice. We're approaching this slow-moving truck, and we also have a car into our neighboring lane that's coming up pretty quickly behind us, and you can see as soon as they pass, it goes ahead and turns on its turn signal to get around it, and then even goes back into its original lane right after. That was very well executed and is exactly what I'd expect from a mode called Hurry. Unfortunately though, I think that was probably just a fluke, and we'll talk about the driver profiles a little bit more later. But first, just keep your eye on the visualizations, especially looking at other cars. They are unbelievably smooth now. It actually seems to me like the vehicles update at a higher frame rate than even the ground markings and the streets being visualized, which is pretty wild. I also wanted to mention I'm not going to be spending as much time as I usually do on this video with editing. You can see I'm kind of missing the turn signal visualizations and stuff, and that's because I honestly didn't even plan to record this video, but this version was a much bigger update than anticipated, and I figured I had to give you guys at least one drive before attending the Robotaxi event, and we'll talk about the Robotaxi event a little bit later. I always like to point out these little areas where I notice it being extra smooth. You can see how it's slowing to a stop up here to stop behind this car, but then the light turns green. And the interesting thing here is that it never actually comes to a full stop. You can see it stays at 1 mile an hour the entire time. It's just creeping up, anticipating that these other vehicles are going to start moving. And I know stuff like that seems pretty small, and I do get a fair amount of comments of people complaining like, why is this guy talking about these nonsense things? But honestly, I think it does go a long way as far as driver comfort, and it really makes the car feel like it knows what it's doing when it's anticipating that well. This is my first time going on the highway with the brand new end-to-end system. No more heuristic code controlling on the highways. You can see a message on the bottom of the screen displaying our driver profile mode saying hurry there. I assume this means that the driver profiles are still only affecting highway and not when you're driving on city streets. The other thing that you'll notice is that even though the max speed is set to 78, the car seems pretty happy going right around 70 miles an hour. So I know there was a lot of you that were really hoping that the car would just go whatever speed you tell it to. Like if you set it to 80 or 85 miles an hour, it would instantly just get there. But unfortunately, that is not the case, and that is not how it works. My first impressions right out of the gate were that it didn't really feel like it was in a hurry, but there was some things, like you can see this traffic about to merge in here, and the car preemptively changes lanes and speeds up a little bit to go around them. It does seem to take quite a bit longer for the car to get all the way up to the set speed, at least compared to the old version of Highway Autopilot, but eventually it does. You can see after quite a while it does end up going 78 miles an hour to get to our set speed. And this area right here, I'm slowing down because this was an area with some kind of mapping error where it would constantly try to get all the way over into the right-hand lanes to quote-unquote follow the route, and then a few hundred feet later it would merge all the way back over to the left here, and this version finally fixes that. Another interesting thing to note about that is that there's actually no longer any messages indicating why the car is doing what it's doing. For example, it used to say things like changing lanes to follow route or changing lanes to get into a faster lane. But since the highway stack has moved to a completely AI end-to-end system, the car can't really describe why it's doing what it's doing anymore, and instead just kind of does it. You can see it did a pretty good job of getting us all the way over into the right-hand lane to take this exit well before the exit got here, which was something that was in the release notes, like more natural lane changes. But again, I think that's something that only applies on the highway and not on city streets, as we'll see in a bit. We have a left turn into an immediate right turn, and you can see it has to go through a fairly stale yellow light. It was absolutely fine, definitely still legal, but I would have expected it to slam on the brakes in a situation like that, but I'm actually kind of glad that it didn't. Some oddity in the speed control up here where you can see the speed limit's 35 and it has a max speed of 42, and even after going past this 25 mile an hour speed limit sign, the max speed stays at 42. This was fine because I assure you nobody actually goes 25 through this zone, and the speed limits kind of change here and there pretty frequently, but just interesting to note. And you can also see the max speed change again as we approach this intersection. It goes from 42 to 38. I have it set to go 20% over the speed limit, and 38 is definitely a lot more than 20% of 25, so I'm really not sure what exactly is controlling the max speed. Our destination was set into this housing development off to the right because I know I've driven through this exact area on previous videos, and I was curious to see if we'd notice any differences through these areas. Does have a little bit of a moment here where it comes to nearly a full stop at this intersection when it wasn't really required. There is no stop sign there. but also doing a much better job than the last time we went through here at slowing down for these speed bumps, going a nice and appropriate speed, even though they were covered by shadows and are kind of difficult to see compared to some other ones, doing a really nice job slowing way down. You can see again right here, going nice and slow. And I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through this next portion of the video because the car got itself into a bit of a loop. You can see it missed its destination off behind us. It didn't pull over in time and goes around the block and then misses it again. So instead of continuing this endless loop, I go ahead and just give it a new destination so it can get itself out of this area. Definitely a little bit more work to be done in the pickup and drop off areas of Full Self-Driving. We can't have robo-taxis just circling around a neighborhood indefinitely. As we make this right-hand turn, the car immediately gets itself into the left-hand lane, which I thought was a little bit odd until I spotted the pedestrian that was standing in the middle of the street. And that's definitely one area where Full Self-Driving has an edge over humans, because my attention was to the left for approaching traffic, and it knew way before me. Doing a really nice job slowing but not overreacting for the scooter who kind of pulled out in front of us and was going across the street. And I also wanted to point out that the driver in front of us seems to think that there's a stop sign at this next intersection when there's not. So I know I just gave a hard time to Full Self-Driving for doing the same thing, but it's also something that humans struggle with too. As you probably have noticed, I'm also fast forwarding quite a bit more than I typically would for this style of video. Usually I like to get pretty in depth, but I ended up driving for over 2 hours with this initial drive. So there's a lot to see, so strap in. Another example of smoothness here, you can see how it kind of just brushes up against these lane lines. It doesn't try too hard to be exactly centered in the lane lines and just hugs the inside of these corners and stuff. It just feels so natural around these corners. It is awesome. Now here we have a freeway on-ramp, and I'm really hoping to see a big burst of acceleration to get onto the freeway at freeway speeds, and unfortunately it seems to just take its time getting up to speed. Even though it knows the speed limit is 65, our max speed is 78, it ends up merging onto this freeway at a little below 60 miles an hour, which in my opinion is just too slow. I think it should be at least the speed limit when traffic is flowing at the speed limit. It does end up going a little bit faster as soon as it kind of pulls in with traffic and starts matching their speed a little bit, but it doesn't get all the way to our set speed of 78 miles an hour this time. It seems pretty happy just chilling around the low 70s, even when other people are passing it. I'm not really sure what the cause is of all the speed issues that we've been experiencing since version 12 when the neural nets took over. You'd kind of think that following a speed limit or something would be one of the more easy aspects of this, but it's obviously not. There's a lot of areas around me where I feel like it drives too quickly, and a lot of other areas where it drives much too slowly. Like right here, for example, we're taking off from this stop sign, the speed limit's 55, it still has a 78 mile an hour max speed, and yet it does not get anywhere near the speed limit. And this is a bright sunny day with clear visibility. If there was traffic behind me right now, I'd start feeling extremely uncomfortable. Luckily, there was none, but this is just way too slow on this road. And although I have been complaining a bit about speed control, credit for where it's due, because this has been a disengagement and intervention-free drive so far. I'll take the speed control issues all day compared to some of the other issues that we were experiencing not that long ago. There's a person who's about to pull out in between the stopped cars to our left, and you can see Full Self-Driving has really good reaction times and really thinks about slamming on the brakes if they were gonna go for it. Really nice defensive driving there. You might have also seen that other car kind of fly by us who's really speeding on this road, and we end up right next to him at a stoplight. And the reason I say this is because once the light turns green, we have to get into the left-hand lane to make a left-hand turn ahead, and it starts to move over, but they start accelerating behind us. So you can see the car is a little bit nervous getting all the way into that left-hand lane before they finally back off and pass us to the right so that we can make our left-hand turn up here. I wish I had the 360 safety camera on for moments like these, so sorry that I don't. Honestly, the car probably should have been trying to get into this left-hand lane a little bit earlier than it did to avoid that situation completely, but we'll look at a better example of that in a little bit. Here are some rather large speed bumps in the road, and you can see it does slow down a little, but not enough to be comfortable. In a Model Y, this is probably fine, and you can see it does slow down a little bit more for this second one. But if I was in like a Model S or a Performance Model 3, that would have definitely been too fast. There doesn't seem to be much of a rhyme or reason to detect which speed bumps it's actually slowing for versus the ones it thinks it can go a little faster through. It's really kind of hard to figure out sometimes, because sometimes it does it perfectly and other times it's pretty rough. As we make this left-hand turn onto this street, there are a few dips on the road, and there is signage warning people of these dips, saying to go 15 miles an hour over them. And although older versions of Full Self-Driving were actually really good with dips like these, this version doesn't seem to slow down much at all. That was way too fast to be comfortable, and I did hit the snapshot button there to send that data back to Tesla so that hopefully they can use it. And another even larger dip in the road ahead of us, and this one I did decide to go ahead and disengage for. I do consider this one a critical disengagement because, like I mentioned, the Model Y, the car that I'm driving here, does have quite a bit of ground clearance, and that would have probably been fine. But if you were in a Performance Model 3, that might have done some damage to your car. We did reach the end of our navigation route and put a new one in, which has the car making a U-turn at the end of this court here, which unfortunately it doesn't turn quite enough to make that happen. And you can see it wants to shift into reverse so badly. The path planner is showing a reverse path, but the car is not allowed to shift out of drive yet. This does cause the second disengagement of the drive, this one obviously non-critical. It feels like we are getting closer than ever to Full Self-Driving actually being able to shift into reverse by itself, and I cannot wait. I'm really hoping that version 13, which is supposedly coming by the end of the month, is the one that makes that happen. Seeing the path planner in a reverse direction just gets me excited every time, because there's so many scenarios that I have to consider disengagements like that one that are going to be completely solved. A little bit of lane trouble up here. We're supposed to be going straight, which is kind of like a sweeping right turn, and even though there's left-hand turn markings on the ground and it's displaying those left-hand turn markings, it decides to stop here and then just continue straight through this intersection, which is obviously not what you're supposed to do. So I do go ahead and submit another snapshot for that one. Scenarios like that where the car gets into the completely wrong lane are getting pretty rare now, but obviously still not completely fixed. Wanted to show you some really good anticipation of a gap in traffic. So watch how early it starts creeping forward when it sees a gap, and how early it starts proceeding even when the other traffic hadn't completely passed yet. Moments like that really do make it feel a lot more like a human driver compared to a robot. And I think that's one big advantage of the end-to-end system, is that it doesn't raise that little red flag. It really makes you feel like the car understands what it's doing. There's a lot of situations, like right here, this SUV to our right is kind of coming into our lane a little bit because it doesn't want to drive too close to the curb, and rather than freaking out, the car just kind of hugs the left side of the road and just drives so naturally. Same thing with the car sticking out a little bit far, not all the way into the turn lane, just goes right around, no problem. One area where it doesn't feel quite as good is its lane decisions for upcoming turns. So we've been on this road for quite a while, and you can see we're staying in the left lane the entire time until a few hundred feet before we have to merge back onto the freeway. And now is when it decides to start trying to move over at the last possible second. This is another scenario where it's hard to see, but the driver behind us actually starts accelerating to not let us in, and it actually just kind of forces its way in here, which on one hand I guess is pretty impressive, but again, it shouldn't have happened at all. We should have been in that right lane way sooner. Here is another instance where we're merging onto the freeway and the car should be accelerating here, but obviously we have a slow Prius in front of us who's merging onto the freeway at 40 miles an hour, and we are too. pretty unbelievable. This is an area I really hope to see some major improvements on. It is a major pet peeve of mine when people merge onto the freeway going like 20 below the speed limit or hit their brakes or do stuff like that. It drives me crazy. Up here, we're supposed to be going straight through this stoplight and then making another left-hand turn after that to get into the parking lot where I have the destination. But interestingly, it decides to make a left turn here instead. It also does complete the left turn, which makes it find a new way to the destination. And the most likely scenario here, honestly, is that it probably just got into the wrong lane. But I want to mention I have seen more and more instances of the car completely ignoring the navigation route and going its own way. Sometimes it finds a better path, and other times it just seems random. This time it actually seemed to find a better way into the parking lot. The other route was going to take us all the way from the opposite side, driving all the way through the parking lot to get to this area, but in this way we just pulled right into where that destination pin is. Our destination pin is right off to our right now, and you can see it's going to try to get as close to it as it possibly can. These curbs are also pretty chewed up. I don't know if you can tell from people hitting them because they stick so far out, but the car does a really good job of keeping a good clearance from them. And it also goes and attempts to park on its own. I mean, it did a terrible job, but hey, there was an attempt. And obviously, because the car is not allowed to shift itself into reverse yet, I have to do that part for it. The last time I called this an intervention, many of you were upset, so I'm not going to include this as an intervention for the drive. I'm always unsure of what to classify as an intervention versus not, but as the system becomes better and better, I find myself becoming more and more strict. You can see it again, having to navigate through these fairly tight areas with these curbs sticking out a lot. I know this is a complete joke for a lot of you in like Europe and stuff, but you can just see how torn up all these curbs are. That's how many people hit them pretty consistently. And happy to say that the car never made me nervous once that it was getting too close to a curb. Maybe if you were in a Model S or X, which is much wider, that would be different, but in this case I felt like it did a really good job. Our last destination is a supercharger that is fairly far away to give us a lot of time on the highway, and also use this version at a time where traffic is pretty dense because I wanted to see how it works in stop and go traffic. But first, after we merge onto this freeway, you can see it's seeming like it's doing a fairly good job at keeping up with the flow of traffic and stuff, but then it seemed pretty stuck at 42 miles an hour. And it took me a while to notice this, but you can see even though our profile is still set in a hurry and it detects the speed limit at 65, the max speed is still 42 miles an hour. So I do go ahead and submit another snapshot there and then manually intervene to increase the max speed, which fortunately you can still do in this version. So that was another instance where it seemed to have a little bit of a mind of its own regarding the max set speed. I figured it would probably just go 20% above whatever it detected the speed limit was, but it doesn't seem to do that. It kind of almost seems to change randomly, so not really sure what's going on there. But with all of that said, I think the Autopilot team has done an excellent job with the end-to-end version of Highway. Whenever there's these major changes, I always get a little bit nervous that things are going to break, but besides the speed control stuff, everything else feels way, way better. And I'm talking in basically all aspects of highway driving. The way it kind of hugs the inside of the corner around long sweeping turns, and the way it accelerates and brakes in traffic and kind of keeps close to cars in front of it when there's dense traffic like this. It all feels really, really good. It's also not overreacting when somebody kind of cuts in front of it. It feels a lot like version 12.5. I mean, I guess that's pretty much what it is. But there are still several question marks I feel like I have. Like, if this is all one unified model, why is there a difference between driver profiles on highway and off highway? Does that mean that this is a completely different end-to-end network that specifically runs on the highway and they have a different one for city streets? Honestly, I'm not really sure. I also have to kind of readjust the way I think about highway driving. Like you can see, it turned on the left-hand turn signal to try to get over into the leftmost HOV lane. And usually when the turn signal comes on, the old highway autopilot, it would only turn on the turn signal when it found a gap that it wanted to fit into. But the end-to-end version, as you can see here, is perfectly comfortable just keeping the turn signal on the entire time and keeping up with the flow of traffic until it finds a gap to fit into. I also know that it does appear that the right lanes are going to be flowing a little bit faster than the target lane that we're trying to get into, but what you have to realize is all these right-hand lanes merge into one. So the smart decision here is to get all the way into the left HOV lane. You can see it start moving over to the left-hand side of the lane here when it finds a gap that it wants to fit into. And you might also notice that the lane changes themselves, I think, are significantly better with this new end-to-end system. So far, all the lane changes that it's been doing have made sense, which I can't say about the old highway stack. And the way that it's kind of anticipating traffic here is really amazing. Like you can see this final lane change here. If you look in the mirror, there's a car approaching fairly quick, and it uses its acceleration to fit really nicely into the gap. Very nicely done. I'm gonna be honest, I'm getting pretty tired and need to go to bed soon so that I can wake up in the middle of the night and go drive to the Robotaxi unveiling. So I'm gonna fast forward until the end and use this time to try to give you a summary. The first thing I'll tell you is that when you use it, it is really obvious that it is far smoother and more human-like in pretty much all aspects. But I also think that I need a bit more time on highways using this new system to form a real opinion. I can tell you for sure that it's smoother and that they definitely fixed a few mapping problems that I have, or maybe just the end-to-end approach fixed those and they're not even actually fixed. But it takes me time to figure out the quirks of the system. But I figured it's probably better to release this video giving some initial impressions rather than waiting to form a real opinion, because honestly, at the rate the Autopilot team has been pushing out these software releases, by the time I form that real opinion, it probably would be outdated anyways. Which isn't a bad thing by any means, it's just kind of crazy how fast these releases seem to be coming out. Anyways, in total for this drive, we had what I would consider critical disengagement when the car wasn't slowing for a dip in the road, a non-critical disengagement when the car got stuck and needed some assistance backing up, and one intervention when it didn't automatically adjust the max speed correctly and kind of sat at 42 miles an hour on a highway, which is definitely not ideal. All in all though, I think we're seeing some really solid improvements in this release especially. For a long time, the highway stack was the best and most relaxing part of using Autopilot, and then all of a sudden version 12 came out, aka the end-to-end version, and suddenly the highway stack was probably the worst part of using Autopilot. In a lot of ways, this feels almost like the last piece of the puzzle. We had version 12, which had end-to-end on city streets, which felt so good. We have actually Smart Summon, which uses some kind of end-to-end network for parking lots, which we've seen has pretty much gotten universal praise. And this really is it. Now end-to-end is also on highway. The AI has slowly eaten through all of the manually written code and heuristics, and I gotta say, I really like the direction it's going. A lot of people disagree when they see it doing things like hugging lane lines or doing, slightly illegal things like not following the proper path and stuff, but I've always been pretty adamant that the best way to get along with humans on the road is to drive like a human. And even if Tesla announces tomorrow that they have completely solved self-driving and they're putting it out on the streets, for many years to come, this car is going to be required to share the roads with humans. And I think the end-to-end system is the right approach. And yeah, compared to everything else, it just seems like it makes the most sense. I cannot wait to see what they unveil at the event tomorrow, or today, I guess, depending on when you're watching this and when I get it uploaded. I'll be sure to record as much as I possibly can, and if you're coming to the event yourself, please do come and say hello. I know that this video's editing and stuff wasn't exactly up to par like the other ones, but I hope you enjoyed my first impressions of this pretty incredible version. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and until next time.